handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er 8 9er out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEBT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. In the last, couple of weeks, the matter of the caravan and the challenges at the southern border have faded a little bit from the headlines, but we're going to kind of resurrect them because Ami Horowitz, our intrepid documentary filmmaker, writer and producer and director and all those kinds of things, has been generous enough to share some of his time with us. And he was gutsy enough to go join the caravan at the southern border, but that's, I would say, not his gutsiest trip. I think the Syria trip was the most gutsiest, but nonetheless, Mr. Ami, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Oh, such a pleasure to be back with you, Denise. How are you?
Oh, you're sweet. Thank you. How much planning, Ami, did you have to do prior to going into embed with the caravan?
It's funny you asked that. So I would say quite a bit. First of all, you have to hire a crew. You got to work at the details to get them down there. But more importantly, you got to find, they're always moving, right, the caravan. And remember, they're not walking. They're generally taking chartered buses. So they can pick up 100 miles easily in a day. And they're always moving to different locations. And you're not necessarily sure what their route is. So we actually, I'll tell you this, and I won't say which organization because I don't want to out this person, but we essentially were collaborating with one of the embedded reporters from a very, very mainstream news organization that was extraordinarily helpful to us on actually the nitty-gritty details of getting there on the ground. So my thank you is to that anonymous person. But yeah, it was very difficult to get the details together and get over there, but we were able to pull it off, thank God.
Well, so Ami, was that like a whole month in advance that you had to kind of pull all these strings and kind of orchestrate this symphony?
Yeah, I would say it was a solid 2 to 2.5 weeks of planning.
Okay.
To pull it off, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
And when you when you finally tracked them down and you joined them, how long were you there?
So we were with them for 2 days.
2 days.
Yeah.
And so was
That
your
was
purpose
more than enough time.
No doubt. God.
It was exactly the 4 seasons accommodations, if you know what I mean, in southern Oaxaca.
Well, it wasn't on the raft either, was it?
That's true. It was an upgrade from that. That is absolutely true.
Okay, so your purpose was really, I mean, I call it the mythical media leading into the reporting on what was going on with the caravan. So your purpose was to demystify, whatever that word could possibly be, take away the myths that the media had been reporting. Would that be right?
Yeah, you know what? I hit the nail on the head. Listen, there's a lot of poisonous information out there. My job is to get the poison out. My job is to make sure that the truth is out there. Because here's the thing that most people don't realize. There really is this kind of, insidious collaboration between the mainstream media and the organizers of this caravan. I don't mean to say that they're actually sitting down with them and the organizers are giving these guys talking points, but I think there's sort of an unwritten kind of agreement where, hey, we're going to try to make you guys look as good as possible. And we're going to try to make sure that your agenda gets out there. So what is their agenda? It's several-fold. Well, first of all, the first thing that you notice when you get there is, okay, what are you told about what the demographic makeup of the people there? Right? The demographic makeup is there's a ton of women and children, tons of women and children there. So when I get down there, I'm like, whoa, stop the clock. These are all men. There are some women, but 90 to 95% are men. Why do we think, I mean, how is it, listen, there's no way that you can be part of the mainstream media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and every framing of every video shot you see and every single photograph you see are full of women. It's impossible to pervade that without having some kind of agenda because there are so few women there. You've got to sit there. You have to organize all the women you can find into one shot, or you have to sit there for hours until you get a framing where there's a lot of women and children in that shot.
Or you start splicing.
Or you start splicing. Correct. So yeah, there's no question that there's some kind of this weird unspoken alliance between the mainstream media and the organizer of this campaign.
I'm of the notion, based on what you just said there, Ami, is that some of these organizers, wherever they may be, the Catholic Church, the organization out of Chicago, organizations out of San Diego, Los Angeles, wherever they may be, they've probably passed on some written talking points / text / opportunities and plans to piece parts of the media. So there's where the collaboration would have begun. That's kind of what I'm feeling, and I think that's somewhat what you're imparting. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I don't want to say that they give them talking points, but I'll tell you where the talking points do come into place. The talking points come into place. They're literally, and this was said to me on camera in the video itself, that the people who are part of the caravan are trained on what to say, what the talking points are to the media. Like that's a huge part of what they're taught. So they're when you go walk up to them and say, for example, was this thing organized by anybody? They're taught to say, no, this was all organic. It just kind of happened. If this thing was organic, I'm a pregnant turtle. Okay, I mean this thing was so organized from the beginning, it's ridiculous. Okay, the whole thing was created and funded and pushed forward by a group called Pueblos Sin Fronteras, which means peoples without borders, because that's their ultimate agenda. The ultimate agenda is we want to make sure we have a place that has a world without borders, because they find the idea of nationality and sovereignty to be obnoxious to their ideals. And ultimately, this is what this whole thing is. That they want to make sure, do you think these people give a damn about these poor migrants who are trying to get for a better life? They don't give a hoot about these people. They're using them as a tool to stick it in the eye of President Trump and to undermine our sovereignty and our border security. That's exactly what this thing is.
Well, it's clear about that, but here's the fascinating thing, because of what you have just described, one being the coordination and a borderless world. We've got a handful of countries, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, so forth, that you've got all these men that are leaving. I would think that the leaders of those three countries would be in somewhat of a panic because they've got a labor drain. I mean, whatever, these people are, there's the men are leaving. So who's going to produce any kind of economic condition? I mean, there's no workers left. You see what I'm saying?
Well, not only that, again, another one of the lies that is being purveyed by the mainstream media, a lie may be too strong a word, but one of the overemphasis on what's happening is that why are they leaving, right? we're told that they're leaving because of imminent death. The area, pardon me, where they live is so dangerous that they are in fear of death every day, every time they wake up. Now, when I went there, I was interviewing the migrants. I asked them, the first question I asked every single person, and we probably talked to 50, 60 people, was why do you want to come to America? And what was their answer? Their answer was always the same: a better life for me, better life for my kids, work, education. These are the things that kept hitting over and over again. Not a single person unprompted said violence. But if you brought up violence, they said, oh, yeah, of course, violence, because they were taught by the organizers, hit the violence thing as often as you can, because they know their only chance they have of getting into America is through an application for asylum. And you can't get asylum because you're looking for an upgrade in your life, right? Which is essentially what they're doing. And by the way, Denise, don't get me wrong. I also would like an upgrade in my life. If I were them, I would do the exact same. I'd do anything I could to get to America. I don't blame them for that. I don't blame them at all. But the question becomes, there's a lot of people in this world who have want, who have needs, who are in dire economic situations. Do we have a moral obligation to bring every single person who has who's looking for a better life into our country? I would argue the opposite.
We would be emptying out North Korea then, wouldn't we? Or parts of China or Sudan or Nigeria? Or
how about all of Africa? How about 3/4 of China? How about all of India? I mean, what are you joking? The entire world would want to come here.
Now, I'm going to give you a challenge because I haven't done it either, so maybe we can do it.
Challenges. Are we doing Truth or Dare, or what are we doing?
Well, we have a division of the military called Southern Command. And Southern Command, based out of Miami, has a very large footprint all over South America, especially Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala and Nicaragua. And what is particularly fascinating is several years ago, I looked at some of their reports on what is going on down there in Central America and Latin America. And I haven't looked at it recently, so maybe you can and I can, and really compare some notes here to see what an official military wing is saying about Central and South America, and even perhaps CIA, as opposed to what Pueblos Fronteras is saying. You see what I'm saying? I mean, there's got to be some real conflict here, correct?
I don't know exactly what you mean.
Well, we know that the leaders, I mean, Nicaragua can't be that important as a country if all of this nonsense is going on. Yet Russia is very, very interested in Nicaragua. We know that we've got big problems in Venezuela for obvious reasons, yet China is invested heavily. So I guess the point being, there's some other layers to this whole story and what is going on in our hemisphere, right?
No, for sure. And this goes back to the Monroe Doctrine, right?
Yes.
Of course, this is our backyard. And our enemies have always tried to create influence among our southern neighbors because they see it as a way to create a beachhead against the United States. It was the same thing 100 years ago. It's the same thing 50 years ago. It's the same thing today. Nothing's changed. There's nothing new under the sun. And all of our enemies are trying to foment problems with our southern neighbors, whether it be Central America or South America, because they see it as a way to get to us. And this is no different. This is absolutely no different. They're looking to hit us with the hind. They're trying to do something to unsettle us. And this is what the plan is with our southern neighbors.
And so these people are allegedly fleeing their home countries for economic asylum, but nobody in media is really talking about the economic burden it is on the U.S. taxpayer, are they?
No, because again, they are simpatico with the Pueblos and Fronteras people because they want to get people. They want them in. They want them here in the U.S. They want them to be able to apply for asylum and to get it. And they know damn well that if they go sit down with that officer and say, "Yeah, I'm here for economic reasons. I'd like asylum," the guy's going to be like, "No, we can't do that." So of course they're trying to play up the whole violence thing and play down the economic reasons because they're trying to they want these people in here. Of course.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Ami Horowitz, our intrepid producer and director and filmmaker. All right, so you've made a few rounds on media since you came back from your field trip to the caravan.
My field trip, yeah. It was like a elementary school field trip. We're going to the caravan, boys and girls.
Now, when you've made some of these TV appearances, have you felt confident that the whole message, your whole purpose has been fully explained? Because when I see you, I think you only get like 6 or 7 minutes, and it's just never enough that I see.
Oh, God bless you. I need to get at least 30 minutes of every show that I do.
Yes, you do.
Exactly. What is this 5-minute business on Fox News?
I can't stand it. I can't stand it.
30 minutes. I need a 2.5-hour segment to get my stuff out.
Yes. And so a lot of people appear on the Denise Simon Experience because I give them at least 23 minutes. But
Exactly.
Okay, now let me ask you this. You're a media guy for obvious reasons, a documentary kind of guy. Have you gotten into any kind of debates or discussions or maybe, stepping on some other media's toes going, hey, you over there at CBS, why aren't you saying this? And, those people in media that you perhaps did meet in Mexico. Have you come across any verbal conflicts with any of your fellow cohorts?
Not verbal conflicts. No, they're definitely not my cohorts. But yeah, it's not often I'm having cocktails with the New York Times. Although actually it happens more often than you think. But no, I have been. This has gotten a lot of coverage. Univision, the video that I did, Univision, the BBC, the Media Matters. Dr. Drew National Radio Show, all cover this thing. So we got obviously massive coverage on the right, and we've gotten a lot less coverage on the left, less than we normally get. Although I will say this: here's how rich this is. Media Matters did an article, and they referenced the video and me, and they essentially called me an anti-Semite. Now, I'm as Jewish as you get.
They did?
Oh yeah, yes, because I had.
How are they spelling Horowitz?
Hitler? I don't know. I mean, these people are sick. They're sick in the head. Yeah, Ami Horowitz. I'm the anti-Semite. Although, okay, to be fair, I don't know if you know you know a lot of my people. We are actually the greatest self-haters that exists. So,
true enough.
So you know what? Okay, I'll give him that. This guy happens not to be one of those self-haters, but they had a temerity to essentially call me out as an anti-Semite because I had to mention George Soros's name. I mean, I'm sorry. Just because you mention somebody's name who happens to be Jewish in a negative context doesn't make you an anti-Semite. Did
they not see the documentary when you went over there to the Palestinian West Bank and did the whole thing?
They might have missed that one.
They must have missed that one. Okay, well, so how many people in government, how many legislators have reached out to you and said, hey, Ami, come on over here and brief us a little bit further on your caravan experience?
So nobody has said come and brief us, but a lot have reached out to say, wow, that was really powerful. We've shared this around. A lot of people in the government and in the Congress have reached out to say, hey, this was a great video, an important video. But nobody's asked me yet to come brief them.
Don't you think it's about time? I mean, we got just a few weeks left until we have a new congressional session. Don't you think it's...
Oh, why are you bringing me down?
No, wait. That you could go do a congressional hearing, or that somebody that is part of a committee can invite you to a congressional hearing even in January.
Sure. No, I mean, I'd be happy to. And frankly, I'd be most happy to brief our new Democratic colleagues. This is not a partisan issue. It really isn't. And there's a lot of things on the immigration issue that we can agree to if we just put aside a demonization of our culture and our politics, which by the way, and both sides do that. It's not just a Democratic thing. The Republicans demonize the other side as well. And I think that we got to take a step back and say, okay, look, as long as we share the same values of the importance of American sovereignty, because by the way, there are some, particularly on the far left, the Democratic Party, who don't believe that. Okay, those are people like Alexander Ocasio-Cortez. I'm not sure we can have a real rational discussion on American sovereignty. I think she finds American sovereignty obnoxious. I think she's against American sovereignty. But there have been a lot of Democrats, particularly in this new Congress, actually, they're going to have a problem because they won so many seats, because they actually had a lot of mainstream moderate candidates, a lot of women who are in the military, a lot of people who are in the intelligence community who ran as Democrats and won. I think those people are totally open to a rational discussion on immigration policy. And I think they're going to give fits to the left. There's a real existential battle in the Democratic Party for its soul between the moderates and the left. And I feel that it's not healthy. From an electoral perspective, sure, I'd love the left to take over in the sense that it would help us win the presidency again next year and win, more congressional and senatorial seats. But just not electorally, but in terms of what's good for our country, it is not good that we have a massive party who is moving so far to the left. It's dangerous for our democracy.
I agree with you there. Boy.
So there's a real battle for the soul of the Democratic Party going on right now, and I think you're going to see it play out over the next 4 years prior to the 2020 campaign.
Well, when you've got this Congresswoman Jayapal from Washington, the state of Washington, that goes down and literally embeds herself and supports the caravans against the United States. I mean, whose oath is she really committed to here at this point?
No, she's a fool. She's a fool, okay, and a useful idiot. She's being used by these people the same way the migrants are being used by Pueblos Sin Fronteras. She's being used as a tool. She's too stupid to understand that.
All right, so my listeners, what can they do? They can trot on over to AmiHorowitz.com.
AmiHorowitz.com. They can follow me on Twitter, on Facebook. Always give alerts on my new videos. They can subscribe on YouTube. There are a lot of ways to touch Ami Horowitz.
Are you going back down to meet the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth caravan, or are you headed to another direction?
Moving on. Just came back a couple days ago from Beirut and the Bekaa Valley. Which I won't tell too much about it beyond that, but I've got a really fascinating video. It's going to make a lot of news after the new year.
Well, I also want to send you to Britain because I want you to do a story on how much of Britain is owned by the Russians, but we'll talk about that one another time. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big, huge round of applause to Ami Horowitz and his really gutsy intrepidness out there in the world and giving us the real story. Ami, thanks so much. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so make sure that you stay with us.
About to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for staying with us on the Denise Simon Experience. I called on an old buddy. We haven't talked to him in a while, but, you know, it's amazing how things that we talked about a long time ago kind of resurface. And so Charles Ortel, who has been all things about the Clinton Foundation, has been very kind to join us on the Denise Simon Experience because we've learned some new things here, haven't we, Mr. Charles? And welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
I just want to add and caution your listeners that you're speaking to the young at heart, but chronologically old Charles Ortel.
Yes, the same applies to me too. But thank you for that clarification, Charles. Listen, we had this whistleblower that had been cooperating with the FBI, whose home, what was it, a month or so ago, maybe a little bit longer, was again raided by the FBI for 6 hours, I think, saying that they were looking for some documents. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a story that was brought to light by Richard Pollack of the Daily Caller, who is a veteran reporter. I actually spoke to him about it when the story came out. I've done a bunch of stories with him on the Clinton Foundation since 2016. And a number of my friends, knowledgeable friends, reacted to it and said, "Oh, be careful, Charles. You know, could be that this whistleblower, did something wrong. Still may have had classified information illegally in his house." And so I ran those questions by Richard last Friday and again today, and he swears that is rubbish and that there's a lot more to this story coming out. And it is an area actually where the reaction to Richard's story has been universal condemnation across the political spectrum, because if you have a whistleblower statute designed to have people who understand, can help the government bring to light and then prosecute corruption, you do not want to put whistleblowers in jeopardy. And this person was a protected whistleblower. So I saw that story last week, and it really, as they say in England, cheesed me off.
What's particularly interesting is that he was under contract with the FBI. He had been, working for them. So what kind of documents would it be that they were looking for, and why didn't they just ask him instead of raid his house for 6 hours?
Well, I don't know, but my suspicion, and I'll direct your listeners to a public site that's really very useful. There's something called the FBI Vault file, or Vault. And if you Google FBI Vault, and then you Google William J. Clinton Foundation, you will see that there's a 3-part data dump on that site. And I think, Denise, the last time you and I spoke, part 3 had not come down. And part 3 shows that, believe it or not, there was an investigation into, I think, charity fraud and public corruption at the Clinton Foundation that began in February of 2001. And what you saw initially was that it was just Bill Clinton they were targeting. But in part 3, you learned that they also were targeting Hillary Clinton for public corruption. By February of 2001, I mean, she hadn't even been a senator for 2 full months at that point. It's already, so she was under investigation. And these FBI Vault files are quite useful because many of them are redacted, but enough of them are not, so that you can see there was a serious investigation. Bob Mueller came in to lead the FBI February 4th, 2001. James Comey came in to lead the investigation into the Clinton Foundation. He was briefed in December of 2001, the papers show, but he assumed control of that thing in January of 2002. And for almost 4 years, the dynamic duo of Mueller and Comey could not see the obvious Clinton Foundation frauds, which are just evident. They're in the public domain that the Clinton Foundation was large enough under state laws that pertain to the Clinton Foundation to absolutely have an independent audit of its financial statements. No such audit was performed. In 1999, the Clinton Foundation disclosed that it had only 2 directors. Under Arkansas law, you are not a valid corporation unless you have 3 or more. So it ceased being a lawfully organized and operated, in quotes, organization. This is a very important issue legally, I'm told, because individuals cannot be charities. A charity must be a corporation, an association, or a trust. And so, you don't need to be as smart as Comey. I mean, I don't have a law degree, or as Mueller. I don't know if he has a law degree. Mm-hmm. And you certainly don't need to be as smart as Rod Rosenstein, who has an MBA and a law degree. And he was the person at Justice from 2001 to 2005 responsible for deciding which tax frauds got prosecuted. So at root here, these 3 gentlemen, I believe, have massive conflicts of interest and allowed the Clinton Foundation fraud, especially during the crucial year 2004, when the archive portions of the archive were portions of the library were donated to the National Archive. They allowed a massive bank fraud, wire fraud, charity fraud to happen, and then they obstructed, I believe, any real serious investigation into the early period, and then the fraud widened. Then Rosenstein was transferred over to be the U.S. Attorney in Maryland. That's when Maryland is the site where Uranium One, and I believe also where the second whistleblower's activities were happening. Baltimore is apparently notorious as a loosely controlled port through which contraband and cash and even perhaps weapons come in and outside the country. And no doubt, elements in the FBI are trying to protect Mueller, protect themselves, and this really is a scandal that, in financial terms, in my judgment, counting all its contours, is something like $100 billion or more. But from a national security standpoint, this is a scandal wherein the Hillary camp, the Obama camp, have been accusing the Trump team of precisely the behavior they carried out while Obama was president, while Hillary was Secretary of State, and prior to that, while Bush was president. I believe that national security, the nation's national security, was harmed by foreign actors who were able to gain access to valuable material under the nose of Robert Mueller, then under the nose of James Comey, under the nose of Barack Obama, and for that matter, George W. Bush. And so people are desperately trying to make it difficult for the public to see what really happened here.
I'm going to circle back and say that I have spent many a weekend where other people are out having fun when the WikiLeaks documents, the first dump years ago, came out when Hillary was still Secretary of State. I cultivated those. I have since cultivated the second WikiLeaks dump. But I have spent many a night where other people are dancing and cocktailing, hanging out in the FBI vault.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Once you get in there and you start poking around, it's real hard to leave.
Right.
It's very hard to leave. Okay, so where we are today, Mr. Charles, on the Clinton Foundation is not only do we have some FBI special agents, perhaps, with distinctive skill sets, those including accountants and whatnot, have been dancing around the Clinton Foundation, but we also have former FBI agents that have created an organization called MDA Analytics. Did I get that right?
Right. Now, I do know who these people are. I am not at liberty to say their names. They are not former FBI agents, but they are.
Okay.
They are true American patriots. They're nonpartisan, passionate believers in the rule of law, passionately concerned about the erosion of impartial justice in this country, passionately upset about corruption at the highest levels and through at the management levels of the IRS, the FBI, the Department of Justice, the executive branch, and elsewhere. And these are people who just said, you know what, we don't have to do this, but we're going to do this. And so they have painstakingly, why I know them is just because I've spent so much time in the public domain on the Clinton Foundation, believing that my best, highest and best use in this matter is to try to get public focus on it. I'm trying to, get these people exposed. I'm trying to prod law enforcement to do something about it. I'm trying to spur prosecutions, convictions, but above all, I'd like to see the example serve as a motivation for Congress and the Senate to reform charity laws. The United States is remarkable in that the number of people in this country who really, you say you were in the FBI vault when others were out carousing, there are just really many tens of millions of people quietly are involved in charity, not to have a fancy penthouse on top of the Clinton Library in Little Rock or multiple mansions or to fly around in private jets around the world. But these are people who actually don't really want to be identified with their good works, because oftentimes the vulnerable, to really help people who are vulnerable and needy, you don't really need to be bragging about it. I mean, that kind of lessens the effect of the gift and even can instill guilt on the part of the recipient. So, there are many wonderful Americans, people around the world in particular, but especially in this great country. One thing that distinguishes us, Montesquieu noticed it in, I think, the 18th century, is that giving spirit, that charitable good work spirit. And so particularly for charities that operate internationally, where arguably those charities, donors to those charities should not derive a tax deduction because the American government is not directly better off, but special exceptions are made if such charities are controlled tightly from a U.S. base. This set of charities that the Clintons claim, in quotes, charities, the false front, personal and political self-aggrandizement scheme. It has nothing to do with charity. It's a monumental slush fund and a disgrace that a previous president, I like to call them rogue as opposed to Rhodes scholars, a rogue scholar, graduates of Yale, and I went to Yale College, but graduates of Yale Lie School as opposed to law school, would go off. He'd be the attorney general, the governor, the president. She'd then be a senator, secretary of state, and an aspiring president twice. That people of that caliber would think it's all right to run this type of slush fund and try to pass it off both to foreign government donors, to people who would willingly pay small beer money for them, to get either out of trouble if Hillary got to be president or contracts if she got to be president. The idea that they would do this, that so many people would let it slide, that so many people would play along, and that it could escape unpunished is so reprehensible, because if we let this example stand, then there's other diabolical people watching it.
Yeah.
We can't let this we can't let them get away with it. And these people, if Michael Cohen is not too big to jail, certainly Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and frankly Chelsea Clinton and the trustees and the accounting firms and the law firms and some of the significant donors who are playing along with this, like Bill Gates, they are not too big to jail.
One component that I would ask about, because we know that the Dallas Observer had reported that going back as far as 2016, that the IRS has been investigating the Clinton Foundation. Where is the IRS in the whole scheme of this equation?
So what I'm not going to name the names because I actually like this particular person who made the comment, but I was given a message through a channel saying that, while technically Charles is right in all his work, what he doesn't understand is that the way things work in Washington, presidents and former presidents get a lot of latitude. And, nobody's going to go after the former president of the United States, even on a tax thing. It's just not done. And, with great respect to this person, who I might tell you who it is offline, that's just not the way. That's not the country I want to live. Right. And this particular person is based in Washington D.C., so it's easy to understand why that person might say something like that. And so the issue here is, as I understand it, the IRS line people, the examination officers in Dallas or wherever else, they certainly would be aghast. But we know from the Lois Lerner experience that under Barack Obama, decisions were taken with, I believe, the encouragement of John McCain, who was upset that McCain-Feingold was overturned. We know decisions were taken by the Obama administration, Department of Justice, and the IRS to persecute
I see where
perceived enemies. You see what I'm saying? And so, to clean this swamp out, what we need to do is go over the trail. And it's funny, people have reached out to me who are ex in government, and they say, listen, on these matters, there's a trail, there's a paper trail. So we need to get empowered FBI people and investigators. We need to. I hope that Lindsey Graham, in his capacity as incoming chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I hope that there will be a second special counsel. And I hope that second special counsel will not only determine the contours of the fraud, but will go beyond that to say, let's go back into the FBI vault file. Let's see what's missing. Let's see who ordered such missing documents destroyed. And let's go back over this whole corrupt process where it's possible the corrupt elements in the FBI, the IRS, and elsewhere decided that they had so much dirt on so many pieces of both parties that it would be fun to set up an informal organization above the heads of both parties, and then become the real force to be reckoned with in this country. And I would remind listeners that under Barack Obama's watch, a decision was taken to let the IRS unionize itself, which I think was a very bad decision. So we're talking here about using the case of the Clinton Foundation and its many affiliates. It's not just the Clinton Foundation. By my count, 15 different ones. Look at the record, examine why obvious frauds were let slide, and then let's go back over this ground. There is no statute of limitations, my lawyers tell me, in terms of conspiracies. There has been a conspiracy to obstruct justice. I think it is a bipartisan conspiracy. And, let's go back into this. Maybe if we need to have, we probably couldn't have House hearings on it in 2019 and afterwards, but we certainly can have Senate hearings. And let's have some journalists. If it's the citizen journalists like you, Denise, and others who need to do this work, let's get the work done. Because I'll tell you, the story on these whistleblowers that was out last night at midnight before we went on air has 760,000 views and more than 40,000 Facebook and Twitter shares on Zero Hedge.
This is really, this is going to be really overstated here, Charles, but when you start looking at the graft and the shell companies and the tactics of government and lobbyists and the illegals that are in ingratiating themselves with other government entities, this is really an overstatement, but I'm almost beginning to wonder what separates our criminalities here in the United States, some within government, lots of outside the government, from other countries that are compared to Iran and North Korea. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
well, I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, I'm sure we all watched, and I am distantly related to the Bush family, or I should say, they're related to me distantly. But I am not a fan, and you don't want to rain on a funeral, so I refrain from saying anything until now. But I think when historians look with clear eyes at the period 88 forward, maybe going further back, but let's just say 88 forward, there was a naive suspicion, indeed on my part, back in 1988, that with the Berlin Wall falling and the Soviet Union doomed and whatever, and China opening up to the West and India abandoning socialism, my naive suspicion was, you know what, the United States will help the world set new
yeah.
And in reality, the corrupt elements outside this country and then inside this country said, nah, that's not the way it's going to work. We're just going to corrupt the United States of America. And I think, there's so many signs of corruption. An obvious one, and, I have a book agent. I'm working on a book, several book proposals. I would love to get an advance for $15 million, or in the case of the Obamas, $60 million for 2 books. But, I mean, give me a break. There's no way a publishing firm will make any money off of a $60 million advance for any kind of book. I don't care if the book, gave you the secrets to live an extra 200 years. You're not going to make that money back.
Correct.
And so the book deals, overpaid speeches, letting former presidents have sweetheart deals in investment funds, whatever. All that stuff has got to stop. We've got to stop it. We've got to go pick some high positions and say, all right, if you're president, you'll have a higher salary and you'll have a higher, but you're barred from doing business after you become president. And your family, you can't have Chelsea Clinton, get a $600,000 gig at NBC with no experience and do nothing and all these other crazy things. We've got to stop all that.
We want very badly to drain this swamp, and I see some swamp being drained, but it's really not those that are hurting us the most. Is that right?
Well, yeah. So my next project after the Clinton Foundation, I remain alive, and I've started on this already. I mean, even though I went to two of the better universities in America, I have watched since graduating the second one in 1980, as the university system, in my mind, at the nameplate universities, went from one where diversity of thought and opinion was encouraged as a way of advancing knowledge, to one of orthodoxy and political correctness and targeting conservatives and being very close-minded in the liberal arts portions of it, and then in the other parts really becoming protected hedge funds, and money spinning opportunities for the professors and donors. The business school where I went to, Harvard Business School, law schools, medical schools. These are all really arguably for-profit enterprises, and I think it's time to bring these top universities with their gigantic endowments to task and say, hang on, Columbia University's got a gigantic endowment, big money-making operations in the medical school, in the law school, in the business school. They pay little to no property taxes here in the city, where roughly in New York City, Manhattan, I think a third of the real estate, close to a third of the real estate is tax exempt. We've got to be looking at this and say, now, wait a minute. The number of students that were graduated from Yale and 40 years ago per class is probably 15% higher than when I went there. But tuition is probably 20 times higher. And what does that tell you? That they didn't expand enough? These tenure. I mean, there has to be a reform of the educational system in this country, particularly the higher educational system, because we're falling behind. We're churning out closed-minded, politically correct, what I like to call the men with the beards and those caps, scruffies, who are clueless. They're just clueless.
It was recently discovered that an outside organization with the use of some universities and their technical abilities have found that North Korea is expanding a particular missile program. And that came out a couple of months ago. The administration denied that was happening, and now it's been somewhat proven. We go to universities a lot, Mr. Charles, to have them assign students I would say, particular projects. Wouldn't it be fascinating to have a business school with an accounting department assign MBA prospects the Clinton Foundation project?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. I earlier a couple, like 6 weeks ago or thereabouts, Harvard Business School had a capital campaign. Now, you would ask, why does Harvard Business School, which has a gigantic endowment already, why does it need to announce a capital campaign for $1 billion? So 4 years ago, I went to the opening. They announced it, and they said, we need to raise an additional $1 billion, and we're pleased to announce that we've already raised $750 million.
Wow.
So 4 years later, I go to the closing of it. They upped it to 1.3, and it was a relatively small number of people there. And I got a chance. I walked. The dean gave a very nice speech where he said, "Listen, you graduates, particularly those of you who've been out for a while, you can add a lot to our students. And if you've got perspectives you'd like to share, we really encourage you to come up to us after the presentation." So I went to one professor who gave a nice talk, and I said, "Listen, I think I've been focusing on exposing complex frauds, something I was not taught at Harvard Business School, something that I think should be taught, particularly to younger people. I'd like to help at Harvard do that. And I want to tell you that I think two of them are coming together as we speak. General Electric, one that I focused on in 2007, whose stock price has plummeted since I wrote an article in February this year. It's down from like 18 to 7. And the Clinton Foundation. And polite, oh, yes, we'd like to give us your email. I sent him an email. And then I went to the dean with the same pitch. And, they've done nothing about it. And these are two stories. I mean, the GE story is going to be, should it go bankrupt, as I believe it will,
Me too.
is going to be a really, it's going to be painful for the shareholders. I don't think it's going to be painful for the employees, because I hope the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation will back up their pensions. But it will be a monumental tale from which we can learn. I mean, GE was on top of the universe.
Of the world, yeah.
For forever. And for it suddenly to go bankrupt after all the stimulus and deficit spending and all the special deals they got, it's a great tale, because I think it will unite the left and the right. I've talked a lot more in the last 2 years on progressive radio, and I certainly am not progressive, on economic matters, though some social matters I might be. It will unite conservatives who don't like corruption and progressives who don't like corruption. But beyond that, what a story to be top of the pack, to let Jack Welch walk away with $1 billion in stock 2001, and have Jeff Immelt milk the company into
oblivion.
The ground. Right, and then to have this new guy walk in October and have the thing fall out from under him, and at the same time, the Clinton Foundation. I mean, it's almost, I don't know if your viewers are familiar with Fawlty Towers, or if you are familiar with it, but it's an English comedy, and there was an episode where the proprietor of like a bed and breakfast in rural England wants to attract a better class of clientele. And so he falls for this supposed lord who's a philanthropist, and this big story about what he's going to do. And there's a poorly dressed younger guy, and he treats him very badly. And the moral of the story is the lord, of course, is a fraudster. And when when people walk around and say, I'm a philanthropist, you immediately say, oh, you're giving away your money. How noble! When you operate.
Your point taken. We're at the end of our time, Mr. Charles. Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Ortel and the Clinton Foundation. I'll have to have you back, because I think there's a lot of follow-ups to this. So, Mr. Charles Ortel, thanks for being with us. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way.
You can't handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 435-921. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 47 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Got Gordon Chang with us, and Gordon is really quite the expert on all things China. And he's a previous guest on the Denise Simon Experience, so he's agreed to share with us what is really going on, especially because of the trade talks. We now have this new phenomenon where Meng Wanzhou, who is head of Huawei, has been arrested at the request of the United States in Canada. So that's going to throw some sand in the gears, I would imagine. But thanks, Gordon, for being with us. And what say you about Meng Wanzhou?
Thanks, Denise. It's important that we asked for her extradition. And the reason is that it appears that she's been involved in violating the Iran sanctions by essentially lying to banks about the related nature of a company that she apparently used to funnel stuff to Iran. We're going to find out about this in a court, and it's important for us to do this. China has been very much against her detention by Canada and, of course, her extradition to the United States. And we're just going to have to see how this plays out. But I hope that the Canadian authorities do honor their extradition treaty with the U.S.
It appears that they are doing this, since they did make the arrest at the request of the United States. Now, this company that violated the Iran sanctions, called Skycom, is that a subsidiary of Huawei?
I don't know if it's technically a subsidiary, but it certainly is related, and it was used by Huawei to evade the sanctions, from all that we can tell.
Her father, Meng Wanzhou's father, is the one that actually started Huawei, and he was in charge of the military wing. What is it, the People's Republic, or the People's Army, or whatever it's called? So is that part and parcel of why there's such a major concern with this matter with Huawei, Gordon, has been going? I remember seeing, a documentary at least 10 years ago about the threats of Huawei.
Yeah, her father founded Huawei Technologies, and he was a colonel in the People's Liberation Army. Many people suspect that the links between Huawei and the PLA are strong. And there's only one explanation for why Huawei could develop so fast from a startup to the world's largest telecom equipment manufacturer. And that is because the Chinese government has been behind Huawei. So although it's technically private, it really is part of a state-directed effort for China to dominate communications. And this is important for us because Huawei is a leader in 5G technology. 5G is the fifth generation of wireless communications. It's the Internet of Things. It'll connect everything in your home, your car, your workplace. So, for instance, if Huawei is in your 5G backbone, essentially Beijing will know when you use your toaster.
Somehow I think they already do. Now, but with that, do you believe, Gordon, that domestic telecom companies that are working diligently to upgrade to 5G have been putting pressure on the Treasury Department and the Department of Justice when it comes to Huawei?
No, I don't think so. I think the U.S. government has been putting pressure on telecom companies not to use Huawei equipment. Okay. In the 5G, in the Five Eyes intelligence sharing and consortium, 4 of the countries have decided not to use Huawei in 5G. That's the United States, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. The 5th of those countries, Canada, has yet to make a decision on whether they will include Huawei in 5G. And this is going to be a critical decision because if Huawei is in that consortium, it can do all sorts of mischief.
Well, we do know that it was 4 years ago that Canada even released a report saying that China had been spying on Canadian federal agencies, including their research council, and that they had arrested a handful of people too. So this tells us, I would say, why the United States felt comfortable in asking Canada to arrest her, correct?
I suspect so. We know that, for instance, CSIS, which is the Canadian Intelligence Agency, is very much against Huawei. We know that there are many people in Canada who stand with the United States on China. But unfortunately, there is Chinese penetration of the Canadian political system. They've got a prime minister who is very China-friendly. And so this is going to be an issue for us because the Chinese would certainly like to separate Canada from the U.S. when it comes to our China initiatives. So again, this is going to be an important aspect of our diplomacy going forward with Ottawa, that they are on board with us in defending Western networks.
Gordon, the United States Trade Representative, which is, I guess, part of the executive branch of the president of the White House, they issued what is called a findings investigation into China's acts and policies. It's a 215-page report. It's very comprehensive. I haven't read all of it, but it's obvious that after doing a wide investigation with China, that we would be doing really any kind of business with China. Are our trade representatives telling U.S. manufacturers to wean themselves off of China and put their manufacturing in other countries, Sri Lanka or Vietnam or something?
I think that's President Trump's ultimate goal. The 215 report that you're talking about that was issued by Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, that was March. It was updated last month, and it clearly makes the case that China's been stealing U.S. intellectual property, either by outright theft or by forced taking. And that report's conclusions are very much the same as the conclusions of the Commission on the Theft of U.S. Intellectual Property. That's the Blair-Huntsman Commission, 2013, updated last year. I don't think those reports make the recommendation that the U.S. disengage from China, but clearly that is what the Trump administration would like. And I think that that's really our only hope of having good relations with China, is to have fewer relations with China. We have a number of disagreements with China which are fundamental because they're attacking our society across the board. And the way to protect ourselves is to lessen our dependence on China and also to cut the ties with many aspects of China. So it's important for us to do that.
Is it accurate, we're hearing that China's financial stability is somewhat in question, or their economic production is somewhat becoming shaky? Is that accurate?
That is accurate. November was not a good month for the Chinese economy. Manufacturing is probably at the stage where it's either contracting or about to contract. Their import and export numbers, which were issued about a day ago, underperformed. They both showed growth, but they were well below expectations. Their price data indicates a softening economy. Just across the board, the numbers from China are disappointing. And I think that that's an indication that there are two things. First of all, President Trump's actions to protect the American economy are having an effect on China. But more important, China's economic model is basically at the end of its range of possibilities. It's just not working anymore. And the Chinese government is desperate to keep it going, but it's not doing, it can't do very much because it's just exhausted.
Gordon, in China's quest, obviously they want to be the leading power across the globe. does that include all industries, all sectors? I mean, does that include aircraft? Does that include nuclear power, telecom, banks? I mean, is it medical? I mean, is it all the way across the board, or are they just really concentrating on any and all things necessarily military?
Well, Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, has his Made in China 2025 initiative, which was announced in 2015. It identifies 10 sectors that China wants to dominate. That was added a sector earlier this year, which is 5G wireless communications. Mm-hmm. China certainly wants to dominate the global economy. And it's even more than that, Denise, because Xi Jinping has been dropping hints for quite some time that China is the world's only sovereign state. So it's not just to become a leading power, it's to become the only power. And Americans need to understand the comprehensive nature of the challenge.
If we add in what China has done in the South China Sea with these disputed islands and manufactured islands, this topic is really, you could probably go on for days with this, Gordon. I mean, this has got thousands of ramps that go into this whole discussion, doesn't it?
No, you're absolutely right about that. You know, we talk about South China Sea and other things, but it's a whole range of issues right now that the Chinese are challenging us on. And by the way, since you mentioned South China Sea, just on Saturday, a Chinese Air Force officer in an event sponsored by the Communist Party publicly recommended that the Chinese Navy ram our ships in international water in the South China Sea. And although this is not an official recommendation, we're hearing a lot of this recently from Chinese military officers, which is a real indication of their mentality. And it's also in the way that this was, in the event that this occurred, it's a real indication that Beijing is thinking along these lines. So we've got to be very concerned about what the Chinese are planning.
So then this tells us whatever kind of power they sway over North Korea and the influence that or pressure that we have put on China over North Korea, I would say was pretty much dead in the water, or did I overstate that?
Clearly, China has been a bad actor on North Korea, and you know, administration after administration, including this one, has wanted China to rein in the North Koreans. That, I think, is absolutely the wrong approach, because the Chinese are using North Korea against us and against our friends and allies. What we should be doing is imposing costs on China, which are so severe that it is no choice but to cooperate. So we should view them as a co-conspirator, not as a friend or partner with regard to North Korea.
How much collaboration goes on between Russia and China?
Much too much.
I had a feeling that was going to be your response. It is to the point where I think it is probably two major powers against essentially one, correct?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. The Chinese and the Russians have been coordinating their foreign policy because you have Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping view the world in the same terms, and they identify the same adversary, which is us. They're both aggressive and audacious. And so they find themselves in harmony. A lot of people say, and you'll hear this, Denise, that you don't have to worry because China and Russia have historically been at odds with each other. Well, yes, they have historically been at odds with each other. But right now, in the here and now, these two countries are cooperating in military, in economics, just across the spectrum. So, we've got to be concerned about their partnership right now. I don't care if it doesn't last 100 years. I'm worried about what's happening this year.
Mm-hmm. Gordon, with all it seems, we know that China's been hacking, and China accommodates North Korea's hacking, and probably even with that of Russia. At some point, you would think that the Chinese, whoever is assigned to what particular role, working under government law in China, they wouldn't need to keep stealing. They'd had figured all of these things out, wouldn't they? I mean, at some point there'd be maybe just overwhelming data that they can't even get through because they've got so much. Does that question make any sense?
Well, that's a great question, and the reason is that for all the stealing that China has accomplished, it still needs more, and because they've stolen so much, it's undercut their ability to innovate. But got to remember that there are a couple of villains here, and not all of them are Chinese. Yes, the Chinese have been thieves, but we have let them be thieves. We've had two presidents, Clinton and George W. Bush, who were just oblivious to the problem. We had a president, Obama, who confronted the Chinese but decided not to do anything effective about it. And now we have a president who is aware of the problem and is actually trying to do something and is willing to use the power of the United States to protect American companies. That's not to say that President Trump is doing enough, but at least we're going in the right direction.
I'm not sure I know what enough looks like. Do you?
Yeah, well, I think enough is largely going to be even more tariffs than we have today, or even more important than that, bans on the importation into the United States of products from China that have benefited from the theft of U.S. intellectual property. We need to go against China across the board. And one of the ways to do that is to go back to what you were talking about earlier, which is disengagement. If we get our companies out of China, there are fewer opportunities for them to steal our stuff. So we've got to make it clear that we are going to defend our networks. We're going to defend our intellectual property. We're going to defend our society. And to do that, it's going to have to disentangle ourselves from the Chinese. That's going to hurt them, but, that's not our problem.
Is there a risk if we tend to do that? I mean, it seems like the most logical step to me that U.S. manufacturers and U.S. companies begin to wean themselves from China. And because we have such issues in our own hemisphere, particularly with Latin America and South America, that seems like the logical place also to put manufacturing. But then again, that has other consequences. But I would say does the debt that China has of U.S. debt, is that play a big role in all of this?
I don't think that it really does. A lot of people worry about it. I don't think we have to for a number of reasons. First of all, the Chinese have been selling American debt to the tune of about $1 trillion since the middle of 2014. And they do that to defend their currency, the renminbi. The only way they can really defend the value is to sell dollars. Also, we worry about the Chinese selling our debt in markets to hurt us. And the Chinese actually have a name for that. It's called the nuclear option, and they've been talking about it since the middle of 2008 or so. They never do that, and the reason they don't do it is because it won't work. The reason it won't work, Denise, is that 100% of our debt is denominated in our own currency. So if Beijing sells our debt to hurt us, they get back dollars. To hurt us, they got to take those dollars and put them into something else, like euros, pounds, yen. That's going to drive those currencies through the ceiling. And the only way that Brussels, London, and Tokyo can bring their currencies back down, which they've got to do, would be to buy dollars. So the Chinese don't mess with our currency because it's not a weapon.
The head of Interpol went to China for what we're not really sure what reason, and nobody's really heard from him since. And I say that as a segue to other tactics that China applies to people that just speak against China and human rights. Do we tend to bring those things up with China in these discussions anymore, or is that a whole separate track?
We don't, and that's the fault of this administration, and especially the one before it. China is vulnerable on human rights, and we should be exploiting that. Right now, the Chinese are detaining more than 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps. Mm-hmm. And this is a crime against humanity. Uyghurs are actually dying in those camps. The only thing that separates those camps from the ones run by the Third Reich is that in the Third Reich, there was mass extermination. In the Chinese camps, the extermination is not on a mass basis. So, we have a situation where people are dying in concentration camps, and we're not talking about. We talk very little about it. The administration, to its credit, has mentioned something about it, but we should be hammering this all the time because this is monstrous. And China is expanding those their anti-Muslim tactics. Basically, it's an attempt to eradicate Islam and an attempt to eradicate Uyghur culture. And they're expanding that across the country right now. It's not just concentrated in the northwest part. So this is something that the United States needs to talk about. And it's not just Uyghurs, it's Tibetans.
Christians.
They're going after Christians now, as they have for quite some time, but they're intensifying the campaign. We need to talk about this, and our administration needs to be at the forefront of this, and unfortunately, President Trump is not.
And don't we have something that says that, when countries are guilty with proven evidence that we can't do business with them?
No. What we do have are a number of laws that give the administration flexibility in imposing sanctions. So, for instance, there's the Global Magnitsky Act.
I know that one well, yeah.
Which we could use with regard to China. And there are other provisions that we have. We have some sanctions on China for human rights issues, which are not that important, don't really affect the relationship. But what we need to do is start to sanction China vigorously. And as you had pointed out earlier, we need to disengage from China's economy.
Ooh, this is a Herculean operation here, isn't it, Gordon?
Well, it is, but it's an existential challenge to the United States. So we have no choice but to meet Beijing's challenges to us.
Wow, quite the conversation. I think you're due for another book. You have one in process?
Not on China. I have a short pamphlet on what's happening in South Korea, which I'm writing for Encounter. But it's basically just a pamphlet.
You have done us a very big service. Did I miss any topics? Did I miss some kind of piece parts with China in asking you a question?
There's a lot to talk about, Denise, but there are not enough days.
Indeed. Indeed so. Well, big round of applause to Gordon Chang. Thanks so much for kind of laying this out for us, because I think it's a very convoluted topic, but one that has to be in the headlines, I would say, in some form or fashion every day, because there's so many piece parts to it. But Gordon, thanks so much for joining us on the Denise Simon Experience. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
About to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
Can we do it again? I like it.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Okay, the midterms are behind us. Yippee, I guess. But the one thing that is, it's the, 80-pound elephant, 800 pound, 1,000 pounds elephant in the room, is healthcare. And we haven't resolved this thing. And so I've got the distinct pleasure of having Doug Badger with us, who is our expert on all things healthcare, Social Security, and those kinds of things at the Heritage Foundation. And he's been very generous with his time to kind of discuss where we go from here. So with that, Mr. Doug, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Thank you, Denise. Happy to join you.
Okay. I know that Heritage and you and many others trot on over to the legislative offices, and you have discussions when it comes to Obamacare and healthcare. Is it happening on both sides of the aisle, Doug?
I think it is. I will say right out of the chute, it's a grave disappointment that the Republican Congress did not do something more far-reaching on Obamacare. I mean, they promised for many years that they were going to repeal it and replace it. They never really did. They did a couple of positive things. One of them is they removed the tax penalty on the uninsured. That's effective January 1. That's great. But the basic structure of Obamacare remains. And that's a problem because, as we all know, the premiums are very high. The cost-sharing requirements are very high. The choice of doctors and providers is very narrow. You know, in the state of Texas, not a single Obamacare policy will cover cancer care at the MD Anderson Cancer Institute. It's in Houston, Texas.
Oh, my.
One of the premier cancer treatment centers in the world. And if you live in Texas and buy an Obamacare policy and you're diagnosed with cancer, that's an out-of-network provider, which means you're out of luck. I mean, this has been a disaster for millions of families. The number of people with individual coverage has been declining since 2016, as millions of people who used to be able to afford coverage for themselves and their family no longer can. So the failure of the Republican Congress to do something about that, as they had promised to do, really is a profound disappointment. And so the question is, what's next? I mean, is there going to be any relief? And the good news is that the administration is taking some very, very positive steps to increase increase choices for consumers and give them the opportunity to purchase coverage that's more affordable than Obamacare policies are.
I'm going to take you back a ways, and I might be bringing up a dead horse that we've paid the feed bill on for a very long time, and that is, I remember something Doug called the severability clause, which meant that if any part of Obamacare, the original ACA, was deemed either one unconstitutional or two removed or any of that, then the whole thing collapsed. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's right. And there is a lawsuit that is still going on. It's in the federal district court in Fort Worth, Texas, and we're still waiting for a ruling. And it makes exactly that argument. It says that, first of all, that if you'll remember, again, going way back in time, when Justice Roberts declared Obamacare to be constitutional, particularly with respect to the so-called individual mandate, he said that it's not constitutional for Congress to require you to buy insurance, but it is constitutional for them to tax you for not buying insurance. And he said on that basis, the individual mandate is constitutional. And he made the argument that if this is okay, then all the rest is okay, as you said, that it all ties together. Well, as I mentioned, Congress now has reduced the tax penalty to zero.
Yes.
And so the argument in the court case is, well, wait a second. The Supreme Court said it's constitutional because it's a tax, but a tax of $0 is not a tax. And as a consequence, the individual mandate is unconstitutional. And as you say, because this all fits together in a whole, that all of Obamacare then should fall with it. And that's one of the questions that a federal district court judge, as I mentioned in Texas, is supposed to answer for us at some point soon.
Now, I'm not completely convinced. I may have been on another planet, but back under John Boehner, a Speaker of the House days, he had hired Jonathan Turley to represent a lawsuit where the House of Representatives was suing Sylvia Burwell?
Yeah.
And Treasury, because they were out using monies from other agencies to subsidize or bail out certain, I guess, involved healthcare companies. And that was illegal because it was the House that holds the purse strings. Doug, whatever happened to that?
Well, that's a very good point, and actually that turned out that had a very, very interesting result. You're right. The House argued that the Obama administration was spending money on whatever were called cost-sharing reduction subsidies, which are payments that the federal government makes to insurance companies. And the House was saying, wait a second, we never appropriated that money.
Correct.
And you're not allowed to spend money that we didn't appropriate. Well, in October of 2017, President Trump said, they're right. And we're going to stop spending this money because Congress has not appropriated it. They still have not appropriated it. So they cut off the cost-sharing reduction subsidies to insurance companies going back over a year ago now. And it was really as a result of that lawsuit, the House brought the suit. The federal judge in Washington who heard the case said, the House is right. I'm not going to order the government to stop paying these until this case is appealed up the chain to the Supreme Court. But hey, they're right. And President Trump said, well, if they're right, then we should stop making these payments. And they did.
So I'm going to be snarky. I tend to do that. So we have the Sylvia Burwells, and I don't know who was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time, but I would say there was virtually no consequence with those players during the Obama administration for doing something illegal, correct?
That's right. And one of the troubling things about Obamacare, and look, the most troubling thing is what it's done to American families, to small businesses, to people who used to be able to afford health insurance coverage and no longer can. But another thing that they did was really, the administration was ignore the law and just say, well, we're going to do what we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And even if Congress didn't write the law correctly, well, that's too bad. We're just going to go ahead and do it in the way that we think is best without regard to the law. And even when courts told them that they couldn't do it, they continued to do it. And there were never any consequences for that.
Yes.
It was almost as though, well, this is a big joke. Yeah, we did something unconstitutional and got away with it. So what? And that's disturbing because, look, everybody, we watch the president every 4 years take the oath of office to defend the Constitution of the United States and to faithfully enforce the laws. But, every single federal employee, from the cabinet secretary to the person who sits in a cubicle somewhere in the bowels of the building, takes that same oath of office. I mean, they are responsible within their area of authority to make sure that they faithfully execute the laws and do so in accordance with the Constitution. And we saw that standard just routinely flouted throughout the Obama years, and that's something I think that has done some long-term damage that I don't know how we ever get it repaired.
Well, and I think that's really what hurts me in my belly with all of this, because going into the vote where John McCain walked in and put his thumbs down on the repeal and replace, it would have been a no-brainer had there been documentaries and or congressional hearings on where we are today with Obamacare, such that John McCain's thumb would have been up instead of down. And I would argue even some of other Democrats would have, their thumbs would have been up and rather than down, because I believe there's much more going on behind, kind of cloak and dagger when it comes to keeping Obamacare alive than we necessarily know. We little guys out here, I know members of Congress would probably know more, but it would have embarrassed anybody to vote against repeal and replace, right?
Well, I do.
Please say right.
Well, listen, I agree with you that Republicans handled that very badly. They weren't really prepared for the intensity of the debate and the ferocity of the opposition. And so, as you say, they didn't take the kinds of steps that they needed to take early on to call hearings, bring up people, and there are millions of them who have been adversely affected by Obamacare, and show what's happening in the real world to real people as a result of this law. It would have been, I think if again, hindsight is 20/20. But if in 2017, before they even put a bill out on the floor, they started in January of 2017 with just a series of hearings, bringing up the small business owners, bringing up the independent contractors, the farmers, the ranchers, the people who have been buying their insurance for years and now no longer can afford it, people who are paying more for premiums than they pay for their mortgage or their rent. And start to let them tell the story. Yeah, I do think it would have been much harder for Democrats and for Republicans like the late Senator McCain, but a lot harder for them to vote no on repealing and replacing that law. And it was a mistake. The Republicans never really told the story, and as a result, the Democrats more or less dictated the terms of the debate.
I would say, Mr. Doug, that at this point, somebody, either, out of the Freedom Caucus in the House or, one of the senators should hold a hearing and title the hearing, "We are renaming the Affordable Health Care Act," because affordable, it can't be in the title anymore. And these are the reasons why.
Yeah, it's One of the ironies of Washington is that the Affordable Care Act made health insurance unaffordable, but that is again that's something I think people know. They know at the street level every year that when those premiums come out, or they get their letter from their insurance company saying, "Sorry, we're pulling out of your county, so good luck. Find another policy." And everybody knows that's what's going on. It has been going on since 2014 when this law took effect. But we've done a very poor job of explaining that to people.
All right, we are hearing more, I would say, about the prescription drug program than we are about Obamacare, and yet we're not. I don't see anything advancing. I don't see the Democrats making any kind of proposal. They just use it as a midterm election talking point, and really, some of these Republicans did too. I think they did a lousy job of explaining their positions, but that looks like the only piece part that anybody really wants to talk about is the prescription drug side and not all of Obamacare. And yet there doesn't seem to be anything on the table. We're in lame duck, I would argue. Where are we with this?
Well, I think on the legislative side, I agree with you. There's not a whole lot going on. But the Trump administration is proposing to do some things on prescription drug pricing, and particularly with some of the really expensive treatments for cancer and rheumatoid arthritis and so forth. These are not the medicines that you get a prescription and you go to the Walgreens or whatever and get it filled. These are physician administered drugs. These are like chemotherapy drugs where you go into an oncology practice or a hospital outpatient and they infuse the drugs into you. Those drugs are very expensive. And the Trump administration has proposed that Medicare should pay for those treatments at a rate that essentially is charged in European countries. Now, Europe, as you know, by and large, I'm generalizing because there are differences between the countries, but just to talk in very at a high level, more or less an understandable way. Basically, they have government-run healthcare, and the prices that are paid for medicines are by and large set by the government, and those governments are requiring the pharmaceutical companies to sell their products at very low prices.
I was just going to ask you that. I'm glad you're going there, because I don't think listeners necessarily understand that foreign countries get to buy our drugs cheaper than what we're buying them for, right?
That's right. And although I have to say, I'll get a little wonky on you here, but look, the United States, Americans enjoy a much higher amount of disposable income than Europeans do, and than just about pretty much anybody in the world. And what we choose to do with our disposable income is buy healthcare. So our healthcare spending, it doesn't matter whether it's prescription drugs or it's hospitals or it's doctors or whatever it is, we spend more on that than other countries. And part of that is because we have more disposable income to spend, and healthcare is something that we're willing to spend a lot of money on. So it's hard to make comparisons between prices. But the difference is that in Europe, the government tells the drug company what the price is going to be, and in the U.S., there is more give and take in the price of the drug. And so what starts to happen, as the administration has argued, is that Americans are paying the freight for the pharmaceutical companies to continue to do the research and development in which they come up with cures for other diseases or better treatments and so forth. And the Europeans and others around the world are sort of free riding on the prices we're paying. Now, there are two sides to that story. I mean, the idea that if Medicare pays less for drugs, the Europeans will pay more. I'm not so sure that's true. I don't think the European governments care what Medicare is paying for a cancer treatment, and I don't think they're likely to increase their prices. And also, I think it's important to bear in mind that for us, 89%, almost 9 out of 10 prescriptions in the United States are for generic drugs. And almost no other country in the world has that level of generic marketplace. Greece, I think, is something like 2% of their prescriptions are for generic drugs. So for Americans, for a lot of the drugs we use, we don't buy them from the brand name company. We don't buy them from the company that invented them. We buy them from the company that stole the recipe and charges a low price because they didn't have to invest anything in the product. So when it comes to the prices of drugs, it's complicated, and we have to be careful because we do want better treatments for cancer. We do want treatments for Alzheimer's to be developed. There are a whole lot of terrible diseases, and if you think about the last 50 years, the real advancements in treatments haven't come from the hospitals, haven't come from doctors. They've come from the drug and device industry. So, as a guy who's getting up there in years, I kind of have a selfish interest in wanting that industry to succeed. So we just have to, I think we have to proceed cautiously. But the Trump administration is serious about this, and they're pushing to cut Medicare reimbursement for cancer drugs and other physician-administered medications.
We heard that access to affordable health care is a right. We heard, I heard that, and I think you did too, Mr. Doug. Do we want, we had this thing repeal and replace. Do we really want to replace at the federal level?
Yeah, to me, when I step back from this, and look, it's not just in healthcare. We see it in 100 different places, and you could do a whole series of shows on this. Washington comes in with the so-called solution to a problem, messes things up worse than they've ever been messed up before, and then comes in and says, guess what? We have another solution, and this is where we have with Obamacare. The very same people who told us they had this great plan. If you like your insurance, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you can keep it. We're going to reduce your premiums by $2,500. You're going to have competition among insurers, 25 million people with individual coverage. Everything they told us was wrong. And they've created all of these problems around the country for Americans, particularly middle-income Americans and small business owners. They created all of this, and now they say, we have the answer. Government-run healthcare, Medicare for all. We're going to come in and we're going to take away your employer-sponsored coverage. We're going to take away any kind of coverage you have, and you're all going to get the government policy, and it's going to be free. Don't worry about it. You'll never have to spend another nickel on medical care. And I stop and say, wait a second, weren't you the guys who made all these promises about Obamacare, created all these problems, and now the solution is give you even more control over healthcare? I think people should be skeptical when they start to hear about free healthcare from the federal government. I will tell you, for one thing, it won't be free, and it probably won't be the quality of healthcare that you're accustomed to receiving.
And how? All right, so I would say now that we're in the lame duck and soon to have a new Congress in place, that while we heard that where we are with Obamacare is now Trump care, I would say now we get to go back and call it Pelosi care, right?
Well, let's be honest. At this point, Obamacare is the product of bipartisan malpractice. Democrats passed a bad law, and Republicans didn't repeal it, even though they said they would. So everybody bears some responsibility for it at this point. And what we should see, I'm not predicting we will, what we should see is really a bipartisan effort to say, wait a second, what went wrong? And the first thing that went wrong is Washington came in and started dictating terms across the country. Here's here are the health benefits it has to cover. Here are the rules governing this. Here are the way the subsidies are going to be structured, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Washington broke this. Washington can't fix it. What we're hoping to see, and the administration is starting to do things in this area, is to give states more freedom to deviate from the Washington knows best rules around Obamacare and try to adapt programs that actually meet the needs of real people.
It's still going to be block granted.
That's right. It would make an awful lot of sense. Did this with welfare reform, by the way, in the 1990s. we had an individual entitlement to federal welfare, and we were getting, people, the welfare rolls were swelling. We were getting more and more people. There were no work requirements around them. We were getting all these people on the rolls, and they were entitled to get this money. And Congress came along and said, you know what? You're not entitled to the money anymore. What we're going to do is we're going to distribute the money to the states. We're going to let the states set up the program, but we're going to tell the states they have to have work requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was the number of people getting cash welfare went down immediately because people said, well, if I have to work to get the benefit, I might as well get a job. I mean, and it actually was very, very effective. And what some of us have proposed is they should do the same thing with Obamacare, take away the individual entitlements to the premium subsidies and the Medicaid expansion, distribute the money to the states and say to the states, listen, you have to set up a program that takes care of people with pre-existing conditions, but without making insurance unaffordable for people who are in reasonably good health. And you've got to give people choices, including, by the way, low-income people on Medicaid. People should be able to say, no, I don't want to be on Medicaid.
Exactly.
I want to take the value, like as with school choice, I want to take the value of that assistance, not go into the government program, but use it to buy a private program.
Thank you, Mr. We've come to the end of our time, sadly. Thank you, Mr. Doug Badger of Heritage. Very much appreciate your presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for being with the Denise Simon Experience, and we'll see you again very soon.